Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the November 18th, 2021 meeting of the Raleigh Study Group on terms, compensation, and today redistricting. So we are here today after having been assigned by the City Council to consider mapping proposals that have been developed by the city. And so we're going to essentially, after a little bit of administrative business, turn it over to city staff for them to review, go over a presentation that will outline what the options are and the things we need to consider as we move forward. And then after we do that, we'll also come back and talk about some scheduling and process. So to start off with, I've been chairing the study group now since the beginning, and I've got a few other things going on, and we are moving into an area that I literally have no experience, practical, professional, or otherwise. And so I think I'm going to step away as chair, but continue on the committee and allow somebody else to kind of take this portion of the study group work over. And so having said that, I would like to entertain any nominations for a new chair.
Can you,
Mr. Hardy.
Yeah, sorry, I froze up before. I had to restart my computer. Anyway, I would, as I recall, Ms. Catherine has had some experience in this area, or at least is more familiar with it than perhaps anybody else I know. And I would move that Catherine be the chair.
Okay, we have a motion to nominate Catherine Lawson. Do we have a second?
Second. Second.
We have a motion and a second. So we have one nomination. Are there any other nominations for taking over as chair? Hearing none, then I will ask for a vote. All in favor of Catherine Lawson serving as chair from going forward, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, well, with that, Catherine, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody else. I mean, really, my thought is that this is going to be a straightforward continuation of the work that we have already done. So we're going to get this done in a pretty truncated timeline, is my understanding from the vote that council had. They really just want us to help facilitate community opinion and kind of some outside expertise and pros and cons for the 3 maps that staff has already done all of the work in preparing for us. And I'm excited to hear about what they have been looking at. So unless there are anything that we want to talk about before we get into this map, we'll talk about scheduling, I think, at the end of all of this. I think we're ready to hear from Ken and everybody else.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to first ask City Attorney Robin Tatum if she wants to kick it off with a few introductory remarks before I get into the meat of my presentation.
Thanks, Ken. Not a whole lot. I think that Eric has sent everybody kind of what the charge is of the group, which is to review these 3 maps and get public comment on them from both the public and groups that are experts or interested in the remapping, and then to collect the public comment and come up with the pros and cons and give them to council. Taisha Hinton, who is our new public engagement director, is also going to go to do a couple of in-person meetings to get some input about your prior recommendations, and is also going to provide the opportunity for people to give comments on the maps at that time. At the end of those meetings, I think either Ken or Ray will attend those, and they're going to bring those comments back to you. The purpose of that is there may be people who are not able to log in or participate during the day. So that would be an in-person, more nighttime opportunity for people who couldn't do it this way in case there's some comments from them. But I think the plan is to bring those back to you. Is that correct, Taisha? Oh, you haven't met everybody. Why don't you just log in and say hi?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Robin, that's correct. Taisha Hinton. Nice to put faces to names. Thank you for all the work that you've done.
Now, there are a number of factors that the council asked the staff to look at, but I'm going to just end my portion now. If anybody has any legal questions or that I can help with, I'm glad to jump in. Brendan and Janie are also available. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Ken, and I think he will give you probably everything you need to know, at least to get started.
Robin, if I might, just so I understand, we're going to review these options that have been prepared by staff. The public communication process will follow our process. So we're supposed to review the options and offer the pluses and minuses, and then it goes to a broader deal, but that's not our responsibility, that's Taisha's.
No, I think the charge is for you as a group to collect public comment.
Right.
To have some portion of your meetings where people are able to log in like they would in a city council meeting to give comments to this group. Taisha is doing something else, but because she has the opportunity to do this in person, and y'all don't want to go out, I think you want to do it remotely, that she can put the maps up and people can actually see them in person at a meeting where there's other things going on too, in case there are people that would prefer that forum. And if she gets more comments there, she will bring those back to you. So you'll get them directly. And if Taisha gets extra comments, she will bring them to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, but one thing I want to clear up again is that what we're doing is synthesizing and collecting the reviews of ourselves and others, and sharing that with council, and council then reviews the 4 options and says, we're going to go in this direction based on the feedback. We're not bringing to them a proposal.
Correct. And there's 3 options, yes. And you can, I think part of today, y'all can talk about how you're going to do that or what the process are going to be. And I think that based on what you hear and what you think, that's how you'll get your pros and cons. And Eric and I talked about it, and I don't think it's going to be like you have to have consensus on all of your pros and cons. I think it's more like just gathering them for the council and presenting them, as opposed to having you all agree. Like Ashton may have 1 pro and you may have 1 con, and those can go on the list without everybody else agreeing to them. Does anybody have any different thoughts, Ken? Or
No, I think I just want to be clear that the council charge was that you are the gatherer of the public input. Staff has identified 3 ways that you're going to get the public input. One of those ways is you'll get emails from people. Another way is people will sign up to speak at these meetings, and they'll speak at these online meetings that you're running. And the third way is that because Taisha was already out in the community doing some in-person meetings to talk about your earlier round of recommendations, that's also going to be on the agenda. Staff's role is to help compile and organize this input. It is the role of the study group to figure out what to do with it, which is basically it needs to inform your assessment of what the pros and cons are of the map. The last thing I'll show you in my presentation after we go through the maps is sort of staff's initial take on how this could play out and how you can meet your deadline to essentially get this done in a little over 2 months from today. And we have some ideas on that, but we think it kind of starts with using the remainder of this year for the public input gathering, and then the month of January for deliberations and finalizing a report back to council. So are there any other questions? before I start and dive into the material? Great. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I believe you all should see a PowerPoint slide. That's the title slide that says 2020 Census Redistricting.
Mhm.
So this is a lot of background information on redistricting generally. Then we're going to present the three options. And then I'll take any questions on the three options. And then I think I'll try to kick you guys off to the next stop, which is sort of organizing the next phases of your work, and how many meetings you want that to spill out over, and what the future agendas of those meetings will be. So we'll start with state statute. Says that as soon as possible after the receipt of the decennial census information, the city council has responsibility for redrawing the districts, and they have to correct any population imbalances. What's been unique about this year is that the census data were delayed by many months. So normally this would already be done. It would have been done in time for filing for elections in the summer, but because of the delay, which is in getting the census data, we were not able to do that. So we're doing it now. But one of the byproducts of that is that we're able to run a somewhat more expansive process around redistricting than has been the case, and to my understanding, in past efforts. The charter of the city of Raleigh calls for there to be 5 council districts. I know that you made a recommendation to consider 6 districts. At this point, we are still working under 5 districts. The council has not taken up that recommendation for this round of redistricting. If they were to do so, we would use the same data to draw those districts, because the districts have to be based on the decennial census, not the updates that are done through the American Community Survey in between census years. And then what does it mean for the population to be equal? The case law says plus or minus 5% is the rule. So obviously it would be very difficult to precisely balance the population. So it has to be approximately balanced, and the rule of what the courts consider balanced is plus or minus 5%. So that was our target, and everything we show you meets the target of plus or minus 5% of the ideal number. The ideal number in Raleigh's case being the total 2020 census population divided by 5, since there are 5 districts. So this slide gives a little background, because I think it's useful to see how this was done in the past and what redistricting looked like the last time we did it, which was in 2011. So these were the districts that were drawn at that time. The population was a little over 400,000 people, and you can see that all the districts were plus or minus. The district that was most out was only 2.5%. So we were well within that 5% cap when we drew these districts. How did we get there? The map on the left shows what the districts looked like in 2010. And you can see that they look different than they do today. District B used to actually extend inside the belt line and encompass some of the neighborhoods in 5 Points, such as Roanoke Park and Georgetown. And District A was largely confined to the area between sort of Creedmoor Road and between 440 and 540. What happened in that interim was that because of it being on the edge of the city and had much more annexation potential, B grew quite a bit. And so in order to balance population, A had to get geographically bigger. And so certain precincts were pulled from District B into District A. District B lost its slice of inside the Beltline Raleigh. District D expanded a bit and went north of Wade Avenue for the first time. And so that's left us with the districts that we have now. Where we are today with new census data is that all the districts grew, but District A grew the least. So just like we had to add to District A in the past, it was the one district that was out of whack. So when we got the census data, we found that District A was well under 5%. It was 10% below its target. District B was within target, but just barely. It was almost 5% out of target. The other districts were pretty close to where they ought to be. So what this showed us was that a lot of the changes that needed to be made, looking at purely how to balance population, was adding stuff to District A, and because District B had become the largest district by population, it was a logical place to go looking for precincts to move. One last thing is that districts do change between census years, and they change through annexation. So you're not in a district unless you're in the city limits. The city does expand its city limits through petition annexation, and this map kind of shows those dark areas, what was added between the decennial census years in terms of annexation of these districts. And it shows that by far most of that annexation, not surprisingly, was in District B and District C, because the other districts are largely only have little pockets and donut holes left to annex, where there's a ton of future growth area in the northeast and southeast limits of the city. And that's another view of that. So from that background on how the districts had been changed in the past, we're talking about the geography and the data that we're using. So the first thing is, as I said, you're not, you only count for purposes of population if you're in the city limits, because if you're outside the city limits, you don't pay taxes and you don't vote in city elections. The other piece of geography is voting precincts. The general best practice is to draw the districts based on collections of voting precincts. It creates complications for the machinery of implementing an election if you split precincts between council districts. It's much simpler from an administrative standpoint to keep election precincts wholly within one district or the other. All of the alternatives we are showing you do that. And then, of course, the population, which is based on that intersection, the population by precinct, which is based on that intersection of city limits and precincts, is how we go down to the block level of the census data in order to get population into this. And while I'm saying this, I want to recognize, as I should have done at the beginning, Ray All, who's your moderator today, is the mapping and data guru who has put together all the maps and the big spreadsheets that allow us to tabulate all sorts of statistics about the population, the precincts, and give you some summary statistics on this. Ray's contribution to this has been invaluable. And although he is moderating today, he's also available to answer pretty much any question you might ask, from what is the ethnic balance of these different alternatives to what is the population of this specific precinct. He can answer all those questions based on the material, the spreadsheets and the maps that he's put together. So the data on what, census data is a lot of stuff. It tends to trickle out over time. There's a ton of tables that are released by the Census Bureau. These are the tables that were in this release that we're using for the redistricting. And we just showed this to let you know that the information that's available is pretty basic. It's population by race or ethnicity. And it's has a little bit about housing, and that's it. Some of the other detailed demographic statistics that you might want to see are not part of this release. Only variables that are listed in this list we're able to answer questions about in terms of how it relates to the districts. And this shows just the websites and the information as the Census Bureau presents it on its website, which is kind of just there for your information. So from this, I'm just going to review. It was already shared with you earlier. This is the council's charge to you. First piece, obtain public input, including from organizations that have expertise in redistricting. So you want to hear from the general public, from the citizens of Raleigh, but you also want to hear from some of the organizations that have an interest and have done research and try to promulgate best practices in redistricting. The report you're providing to council is a list of pros and cons for each of the maps. So we prepared 3 alternatives you're going to develop based on the public input and your own deliberations and thoughts, a list of pros and cons. And then the third part of your charge is that you have a deadline, and the deadline has been set so that the council has plenty of time to consider your report and make a decision comfortably within the time frame that they absolutely positively have to get this done. So they have set a deadline that gives them some cushion in that, but I think that's good because it allows to make sure that we're going to meet our ultimate deadline should something unforeseen happen. The council's charge to staff was simply to draw 3 alternatives that met these 6 criteria. And these criteria are based both on legal requirements and statute and case law, as well as commonly accepted best practices. So let me go through these a little bit in detail. So the first thing, as I said, is that we're using voting precincts and we're not splitting them. Equal population means plus or minus 5%. Compactness is kind of one of those things where the district doesn't look funny. It doesn't snake around or look like a serpent or have some odd shape. The districts seem to look logical. They may follow major geographic boundaries. They're not obviously gerrymandered in some way. Contiguity is just a requirement that there's no islands. The precincts are all contiguous with each other. There may be islands of city limits within a precinct because the city has, because that's the way our city limits are. There are islands of city limits throughout the city and especially on our edges, but the precincts are all contiguous. There's this notion of preserving communities of interest. And this is a very broad term, which can be interpreted in many ways. An example that I use that's relevant to Raleigh is that the neighborhoods that are around NC State have typically been in District D. And you could say the university is a major employer, but it's certainly a huge institution that has significant impacts on its surroundings, so that people who live in the neighborhood surrounding NC State have at least one common point of interest. They're interested in what the university is doing. And so keeping them together, there's a certain logic to keeping those neighborhoods together in a single district. Avoid pairing incumbents simply means we don't put 2 sitting council members in the same district, causing them to either run against each other or drop out of the next election. And all of the alternatives we're presenting to you keep all the incumbents in their current district, which has been the past practice in redistricting. The last item speaks to that idea that the northeastern and southeastern parts of the city are where the largest share of annexable land is available. And one of the things to know is that Wake County for a long time has brokered a series of interlocal agreements about where the constituent municipalities of the county will and will not annex. In many other counties, this hasn't been done. And when someone wants to develop property, they may go shopping around, or the cities may fight with each other as to who gets to annex it. We have already worked out interlocal agreements with all of our neighbors in Wake County that we'll annex here and not there, and vice versa. And so when we talk about our future annexation areas, it's really defined by those areas. So if someplace, physically could be part of Garner or it could be part of Raleigh, we look up those agreements. It says, oh, you want annexation, you want utilities, you need to speak to Raleigh or you need to speak to Garner. So that's what we talk about. And the future annexation areas, by far the largest areas left are bordering the northeast and southeast parts of the city. That corresponds to districts B and C. There is a website that's up. It contains the following information. It has the 6 criteria. It has details on the 3 alternative maps. It has information about upcoming meetings. It included this meeting. It includes the meetings that Taisha is going to be hosting in December. It provides some details about how to provide your public input. And this website went live on Tuesday, the same day that we last presented on this topic to City Council. So the next part of this is the maps. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions from anyone.
Can I
Hearing
just have
nothing.
one, just to clarify?
Oh, okay.
You mentioned District C and B being the ones that are most probable for future growth. That's B as in boy.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
all the districts can have growth. Obviously, if you tear down a small building and then put up a big building, that's growth, doesn't require annexation. But in terms of where the city limits can grow, it's primarily on the edge of B and C. And one thing, and I'll get to the map, is that right now, by far the most future annexation area is actually in District C, and that dates back to a decision in the late aughts that when Rivertown, which is a little satellite annexation that's way out in the northeast, was annexed, it was put in District C. And because it's a lightly populated area with really large precincts, it turns out that C not only has a lot of annexation area in the southeast, it also has about half of the annexation area or more in the northeast. And so some of the scenarios we'll look at will try to balance that out a little bit so that it makes a little bit more geographic sense.
Yeah.
So again, these data are sort of replication. We showed you where we are. The big problem that has to be solved for the population balance is the fact that District A is out of whack. It's short by 10% of its target population.
Yeah.
Ken, if you could, yeah, I think Harvey has a question.
Yes.
On this slide, am I to assume that the sort of ghosted space on that is where there are opportunities for annexation?
Generally, yes. Yes.
Okay.
But they're larger than what's shown on the map because the map has been zoomed a little bit, so we don't see all of the southeastern area on this map. And the other proviso is you see some little purple hazy area under District D. That is in our extraterritorial jurisdiction, but it's in the Swift Creek watershed, and by and large, we're not annexing into that area, even though we zone it. And that's a legacy of an old watershed protection plan that goes back to the early 90s. So
Thank you.
the ideal population for each district, the target is about 93,500. District A, only 85,000. District B, over 98,000. As I said, B and C have the largest annexation potential. So the first scenario is essentially moving a single precinct of around 7,000 and some people from District A and District B. And the reason why this scenario was done was simply to answer the question, what is the least amount of change from the status quo that could be done that would get us to a point of balance? And so what this does is by moving this large precinct from A to B, or from B to A, sorry, is you then end up with B becomes the smallest in population currently with less than 2.7%. District A becomes well within target, only 1.6% down. The other districts are unchanged in terms of where they were. So, so this scenario brings things into balance, does not really address the imbalance in future annexation areas between B and C, but it is the most, say, minimally invasive approach to redistricting, which is why staff developed this particular alternative. And these maps show the current condition, and on the right, what's moving. There is one, if you look at up in the northern part of the city and sort of the north of Durant Road, you will see a tiny little area that goes from A to B. That's just sort of a legacy that staff decided to clean up. And very few people live in that area. It mostly is the Falls Lake water treatment plant. But it goes from District A to District B. But the big change is this move of this precinct that's down south of Millbrook Road on the west side of Capitol Boulevard going from B to A. So minimum change, 2 precincts moved, the big one from B to A, and then this minor change of precinct 0204 from A to B. District C, D, and E, as I said, are unchanged in this scenario. This is scenario 2, and this has some more significant changes to it. Additional precincts are added to District A, but District A also surrenders a current precinct to District B, and we realign some of the areas that are northeast of the 440 and New Bern Avenue, giving some of that area over to B. There's also some adjustments between Districts E and D, but like the scenario before, we're still well within the 5%. The largest variance under this is that District D is down by 2.2%, and District C is up by about 2%. B and E are very close to target, and A is a little bit over target, but only 1.4% over target. So let me detail sort of geographically what those changes mean and some of the thinking behind them in particular. So I'm going to start with starting with the area around Creedmoor Road. So in order to get A up to population while also making some adjustments between what's in A and what's in B, an area north of Millbrook Road and west of Creedmoor Road goes from District E to District A. Let me just say that, every time you move precincts, there's knock-on effects where it kind of precipitates multiple adjustments. We also put more of the area between the CSX Railroad and Capitol Boulevard, moving it from B to A. You'll see a little green finger above that's not moved, and that's just because the precinct is a very long precinct and we would have to split it. But for the most part, what this does is it means that if you're west of Capitol Boulevard, you're in District A, and if you're east of Capitol Boulevard inside 540, you're in District B or C. There's an area north of 540, North Raleigh, running from 540 to Durant Road. That's between Falls of Neuse and Capitol Boulevard. The thinking here was that 540 is a major delineator and geographic barrier. It seemed to make somewhat more sense for that area to be part of District B because of it being along 2 major transportation corridors, Falls of Neuse and Capitol Boulevard, which are treated differently north of 540 than they are inside of it, that there would be some affinity there to moving that area from District A to District B. Now, down in the area between Capitol Boulevard and New Bern Avenue, just out of 540, are some more changes. So the very large precinct that includes that satellite annexation that you see hanging out there on the far eastern edge of the city, that precinct would move from C to B. And in order to balance that loss of population, B would deliver the neighborhoods that are kind of along between Capitol 440 and New Hope Road, just south of the Lewisburg Road and Capitol Boulevard split, would go from B to C. So that includes neighborhoods like Starmount. There's one adjustment between D and E. I mentioned earlier that historically District D used to kind of be confined south of Wade Avenue. It took in the Blue Ridge Road area, and it also took in Hayes Barton and some other neighborhoods north of Wade Avenue. This proposes to give to transfer Hayes Barton and those neighborhoods north of Wade Avenue inside the Beltline back to District E where they were in 2010. So these precinct numbers are not going to make a ton of sense to you unless you have a precinct map in front of you, but we wanted you to have this information, and since this presentation will be something that you'll take away from here, these are the specific moves of what precinct numbers are moving. There are 15 precincts that are shuffled around from this, and the ones that are starred are ones that are actually being returned to where they were in the 2010 version of the council districts. So summarizing what I just said, you got an area around Lake Lynn, north of Millbrook, east of or west of Creemore Road goes to A, District A. District A also takes in more of the area west of Capitol and north of 440 and south of Millbrook. District B gets that area between 540 and Durant. It gets some area north of New Bern Avenue, including much of the northeastern future annexation area. The District C does take in an area east of Capitol, west of South Hull on New Hope Road, south of Lewisburg and Buffalo, includes Star Mount and some other neighborhoods in that vicinity. The changes to D&E are basically that area north of Wade. I did forget to neglect one thing. If you look down along south of downtown Raleigh, there's a small precinct that is between Wilmington Street and South Saunders that includes the Walnut Terrace Public Housing Complex, as well as the Gateway Park Affordable Housing Development. This alternative and alternative 3 proposed moving that from C to D. Now I'll get to the next.
Ken,
Yes.
Ken, before you go into the third map, so you mentioned with the first map that the point of including it was really to show what kind of the most little c conservative change would be to the existing districts, right? So it's the minimalist kind of take for the maps. What is that second map optimizing for? Obviously, you have these 6 legally permissible criteria that are being considered, but kind of, can you tell us more about the rationale behind map 2?
I think the main thing was to try to look at drawing the boundaries more based more on two things, some logical, using some big transportation corridors and psychological barriers to kind of better match to better match the districts to the geography. So that was what was animating the idea of consolidating the neighborhoods north of Wade Avenue into District D and consolidating areas north of 540 into District B. The other animating idea, which is also represented in scenario 3, was to balance better how much future annexation area was available to District B versus District C. Because right now District C has the lion's share of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it seemed more logical to people that northeastern future annexation area was probably more aligned to District B and the southeastern more aligned to District C, simply because District B has typically been the northeastern part of the city and C has been the southeastern part of the city.
Okay, thank you.
So scenario 3 might be seen somewhat as a variation on similar themes with just a few additional tweaks based on some similar lines of thought. I will say about this one is not quite as well balanced as scenario 3 is. In fact, District B still ends up kind of over target, not as much as it is now, but 3.5%. District D ends up under target by about 3%. And I'll go through what the major changes here are. So in this case, the area that was going from District E to A, west of Creemore Road, does not change. We have the same change south of Millbrook Road, where areas go from District B to District A on the west side of Capitol Boulevard. And we also have the same scenario where District B retains or takes over the area between 540 and Durant Road. But it also takes in a area that's currently part of District A, which is located west of Triangle Town Center, in that area sort of defined by the railroad and Capitol Boulevard south of 540. The other thing is that, I mentioned earlier that there used to be kind of an unspoken rule that every district would have a slice of inside the Beltline, Raleigh, and 4 of the districts did, and 1 of them didn't in 2010. Now 3 of the districts extend inside the Beltline and 2 of them do not. This alternative does bring District A inside the Beltline. So you see a portion of the area east of the 5 Points area that would include Georgetown and Drury Hills would go from District E to District A. The changes between Districts B and C are the same as an alternative to the move of neighborhoods north of Wade Avenue from District D to E is also the same. There's one additional change, which is there's some areas that are developed around Umstead Park that go from District D to District E. So part of the thinking here is that proximity to Umstead Park is another shared interest for those neighborhoods in our experience. And so unifying the neighborhoods that surround Umstead Park in District E was one idea that animated that change there. But as a result of District E had to give up something, and that's why we're taking that area in. So that's why there's an area that moves from E to A in this scenario. So this again is a list of what changes. Some of these changes, the ones with stars, are a return to the pre-2011 district shape, but many of them are not. This part of the presentation gives sort of a detailed list of what I talked about on the map. And going back to the numbers again, it's achieved balance, but the balance is probably not as good as, or is numerically not as good as it was for scenario 2. So that essentially concludes my presentation of the 3 alternatives that have been developed, and I would be happy to take any further questions on them.
So let me take a shot. My head hurts, but how much is this balancing of B and C? Is that designed to minimize challenges that you might have coming in 2030?
Yeah, part of it was designed to make sure that we didn't end up with a large imbalance in population over the next 10 years of growth. And I think the looking at where growth is occurring, our concern was that we would end up with a really large share of growth ending up in District C exclusively, because it was taking in all the areas out Buffalo Road, where there's been a lot of recent rezoning activity, as well as all the southeastern area where utility projects are opening new land, that location for growth. So we saw a lot of potential for growth both southeast and northeast of the city. Under the current maps, the bulk of that would end up in District C.
Can you show the second scenario again? And the numbers.
So this scenario definitely leaves more room for growth in District B, a little bit less in District C, and that was just, a function of where there were precincts available to be moved, what the population of those precincts were. And one of the things I should note is that the precinct lines are not updated very often, and therefore there are some wild variations in their population. They are not evenly populated. There's some as small as 1,200 and some, I think, as large as 12,000 population. And that's a complicating factor in drawing the districts.
So did you explore any options in which you might have had negative variance in C and B and heavier in the others, knowing that you would be planning for it to balance out, just for what it's worth?
You know, we have talked about it. I think one of the issues there was what you could do is obviously move a precinct from District D to from District C to District D. And I think, where that runs into gave us a little bit of pause, although it's certainly possible to do it, was the notion that historically District C has been Southeast Raleigh and District D has been Southwest Raleigh. And that when you do that, a significant chunk of what people conceive of as Southeast Raleigh ends up in District D.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Ken, can you talk a little bit more about the role of those kind of historical affiliations have played in the map making process? I mean, obviously the maps that we're looking at are variations on a theme. The rough geographic distribution of the districts pretty much aligns 90% of the time with what they have been for the last 10 years and 10 years before that. And some of these precincts are just being recommended to move back to a place where they already were 10 years ago. Can you talk about why it is that is the approach taken in these recommended maps, as opposed to something that maybe gets incorporates some different ways of envisioning how Raleigh can be broken out?
Well, that's an excellent question. Again, we have at the staff level, we have been somewhat deferential to history in drawing these, and because we recognize that they were based on ideas of communities of interest, which in some cases have changed, but in other cases haven't changed. So the areas around NC State are still the areas around NC State, traditionally part of District D. We felt like we should honor that. Southeast Raleigh has had a distinct identity. Staff felt that there was a good reason to keep that together. It seems like, the evolution of districts over the years has been more significant in the areas north of 40 and 440. And stuff has been swapped among those districts somewhat more frequently, if you look at the history of redistricting. But, there's sometimes communities of interest grow based on how lines were drawn in the past. And so I think we gave a little pause before departing radically from those thoughts. That said, the growth of District C in some of these scenarios to north of New Bern Avenue is outside of 440 is something that is a change that I think is different from how they've been drawn in the past. But part of that was just when Rivertown was annexed, which is that satellite floating way out in the north of New Bern Avenue in the eastern part of the city. When it was put in District C, that kind of set this pattern where District C expanded way out. We just felt that given where growth was going, that was no longer logical, but it caused us to have to swap things. There's probably thousands of different ways you could draw balanced population districts. So you have to start somewhere with something. And, this based on, our internal deliberations of what seemed to make sense was where we landed for these three alternatives.
Have you done any demographic analysis of these, and does that make any difference?
We have, and I'll just summarize briefly. None of these alternatives change it a whole lot, But just to use a simple statistic, we've looked at each district in terms of the percent minority population. And there are two, in the current system, there are two majority minority districts. They are B and C. That continues to be the case. In scenarios 2 and 3, the minority population in B falls somewhat because of it increases in A. But it still is majority minority. And C is very close in all the scenarios to the existing percentage. The major change there is, and then D gets slightly more diverse because of that move of that one precinct that includes Walnut Terrace from C to D.
In any of your scenarios, did you find yourself having to adjust your thinking based on having two council members in the same district?
We knew that was something that we were not going to propose from the get-go, so we certainly we never drew a alternative and then found out later that that was the case. We simply avoided drawing any alternatives that was the case. I think the main driver there is that the sitting members for District A and E they live not that far away from each other, and so that definitely has some influence on how these are drawn, as it did in 2011.
Thank you.
In thinking about scenario 1, where the goal is really to try to minimize change, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages? And if you think about potentially costs, would be a reason to minimize change and voter education. But are there kind of other things that go into why that would be a decision one way or another?
Well, I think the advantage is if you're an active participant in city elections, the vast majority will be in the same district they are now, so you don't have to switch line. You don't have to figure out what you think of the district council member in your new district because you're in the same district. So it provides a fair amount of continuity. In terms of direct cost, I'm not sure there is a direct cost impact. I don't think it impacts the major cost of doing the elections is just cranking up the machinery of voting. The biggest impact there is the move to even years, where you're going to run the election at the same time as other elections you're running anyway, so you're not cranking up that machinery. You're cranking it up at a time you'd be cranking it up anyway, whether there was a local election or not. The other types of voter education materials that are printed, the voter guides and everything, I believe just will naturally be adapted to recognize the new district boundaries, and I don't think there's any additional cost with that. So I think that the costs, if any, are more intangible. That's having as an individual voter learn the lay of the land in a different district from the one you were in for prior election cycles.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So even thinking about, if we're doing the shift to even years, that we may have an opportunity to get more people involved and with new information anyway. I wonder if that's as much of a risk as it might historically have been.
Yeah. I couldn't speculate.
The other question I had was around, we talked about annexation and the growth in those districts. Is there a way, and maybe in the near term, the answer is yes, but in the longer term, no, but to account for areas where we know there are proposed dense housing developments, as that kind of growth might affect representation?
We could try to look at past trends, and we can also look at where known activity is happening, either an approved development plan or someone taking the step of rezoning property with the, you know, which is usually a precursor or often a precursor to development plan. And, you know, just based on what we've seen, the big things that are happening are Old Town is being built out in the southeast, and there's a lot of interest in property around Buffalo Road, on both sides of 540. So yeah, we can take that into account. I think what we can't know is the demographic makeup of those future residents. I think the best we can assume is that it's not terribly different from the demographic makeup of the city as a whole. Raleigh, like many southern cities, has a history of residential segregation that has continued to reproduce itself to some extent, even in newly developed areas. But on the other hand, new developments tend to not be so segregated as some of the older parts of the city. And I think that is probably a pattern that will hold true for the new development that happens here, is that you'll see the ethnic and racial makeup more closely mirror the balance of the city as a whole, as opposed to the legacy areas that it might be near. That's a little bit speculative, but.
Hey, Ken, for the public's consumption down the road, is it possible for these options to also maybe identify a couple of key like neighborhoods or, you know, in the swap areas so people can figure out a little bit easier geographically where they are?
Yes, and I will say that Ray has created using the GIS tools. There's an external link on the website for this process that allows people to zoom in and out on the maps and take in that more detailed geography. I know that for those of us who are not intimately familiar with every corner of the city, which is probably, you know, most people who don't work in the planning department, you're not necessarily, if you live in Briar Creek and I talk about Starmount, you're probably not going to know where that is. You know, the maps that we're showing you in this presentation view have been cleaned up to show only the very largest transportation corridors. And so it's not obvious where Millbrook Road is, for example, on these. So the maps are on the website, allow you to get into that level of detail and zoom in and out. And they also allow you to put in your own address and see where you sit within the different scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Throw in that went live today.
Thanks, Ray.
Just to make it easy, can you tell us where we can find that on the website? I think that would be useful to me as well.
Good call.
Ray?
Yeah, I can send a link to the chat, and I can check the best way to search it on the website real quick.
So if you guys are ready, and seeing that we've got, I think, 22 minutes left in our allotted meeting time, this is just a conversation starter, but we gave a little thought as to how you might go about structuring your work. And the notion was we're now in the middle of November, and of course it's sort of the holiday season, but we probably have time to potentially schedule a couple of meetings. And so we could look at using the remaining time of the year to focus on getting the citizen input and the input from the expert group. So you might think about scheduling a couple meetings, maybe one of those meetings the expert groups are invited to, and the other meeting is just sort of an opportunity for any interested citizen to comment. As I said, we've also, you know, provide an address where folks can email comments to the group directly. Staff would work to kind of produce a digestible summary of all of that input. And this would also include any input that was received at Taisha's 2 public listening sessions in December. Then sometime in January, you could, that would cover the public input, and then you could start deliberating as a body on the pros and cons. And we would see the need for at least a couple of meetings, one to host the bulk of the deliberations. Staff would take the results of that and sort of draft an initial, produce an initial draft of a report, and then that would come back to you. You could review it, and once you were satisfied with its contents, you could take a formal vote and say, this is what we're sending to City Council. And that seems like a feasible way to meet your charge within the deadline of getting done in time for the first council meeting in February, which is on February 1st. So I don't know if there's any reaction to that general thought of 4 meetings, but that's seemed like a logical way to structure it. And of course, obviously, it's a conversation starter, so it's up to the study group to decide how you want to do it. But we just thought it'd be good to put a scenario out there for that.
I think that's really helpful, Ken. And just for, as we talk about all of this, guys, if we wanted to do 2 sessions between now and really the kind of Christmas, New Year break, we could potentially do that on a 2-week schedule of having the meeting about the expert groups or about expert input on the 2nd, if we were to say 2 weeks from this Thursday, and then the one with the citizen input on the 16th, which would also be the week after Taisha has held her public meetings on which I believe are scheduled for the 6th and the 8th from what I saw. So I think that doing those 2 meetings in December is definitely doable.
Great.
I'm good with the dates. What are the times? I mean, are we happy with 2 to 3:30 or? I mean, those work for me, but.
They work for me, and I think that makes sense. But subject.
Can you say the dates one more time?
That would be December 2nd and then the 16th. And we could do, again, 2 to 3:30 if that works for people.
Yeah, that time makes those days work for me as well.
It works for me too, yes.
Okay.
Who are these expert groups, by the way?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Ken and Robin, do you all have, I mean, I'm aware of a number of groups that would probably qualify as having experience in this area. Is that something that you all already have thoughts on and ideas about invitation, or would you also like us to, as the study group members, to kind of invite people to come and present or talk or just solicit their feedback? Do you all have initial thoughts about that?
I don't. I mean, I think that the I mean, I think that it was contemplated that the study group would assist with obtaining public input, including organizations that have expertise. I don't know who they are talking about specifically. I guess maybe Ken and I could try to. I know that, who was at that meeting that Patrick Bufkin did, Ken? Who attended?
Yeah, there were a number of different groups. I think Common Cause was on there, and I would have to go back, but I know that the council member did express that the groups that participated in his town hall were kind of who he had in mind.
It's the League of Women Voters, I think, were there.
Yes.
It is, and the Raleigh Wake NAACP was another one that was thrown out. I would
Right.
use the term, expert subjectively, but yes, those are some groups that could help.
So I guess two things. Ashton put in the chat, should we pick our January meetings? And I agree with that, if we can. And then I guess we need to, I don't know who's going to actually agree to who the expert groups are. Do we need to agree to that, or just assume staff will get the right ones? Or how do we want to make sure we don't want to pick some and not include others? I don't know who the groups are, other than I've heard of Common Cause, of course.
Oh, we had Common Cause, Women Voters, NAACP, I think were the three, and we can find out, I guess, who came to that other, and I guess, Ken, I guess we could reach out to Councilmember Buffkin and find out who his contacts were. That's all I really know to do.
For sure.
Are there any other groups anybody else knows of or thinks should be included? I don't, but I'm just offering it out.
I think someone had mentioned RWCA, if I'm not mistaken. And if you're gonna have a balance, I think you need to have the RWCA and possibility the Wake County, not the well, I just say the RWCA at this time. But we do have a voter coalition group too, and I was just wondering about that. If you're gonna have a balance.
If I might, the concept of expert would not necessarily mean somebody coming to the table with a bias, but somebody came to the table unbiased, and that the other places where we have feedback loops, those biased perspectives could be delivered. That would be, I don't know if you follow my distinction here. Otherwise, once we get into calling every biased group expert testimony, we could wind up with a whole series of people who either feel included or excluded. But if we had sort of non-biased data points being delivered, and I don't know who that is. I'm not familiar with this space.
Well, and the other thing I want to be mindful of, I don't think the desires that we solicit expert legal opinion about, right, the legality or the advisability of the maps. That's not what we're doing here, because we are not competent to weigh in on that part of redistricting. Staff has their counsel, and they're all very excellent people who know what they're doing on that front. So I think when we're thinking about experts, I think what we're wanting to hear about is how is this going to impact the communities? How is this going to represent, right, the growth of Raleigh? So we're really, I think, looking more for experts in kind of the community development of our city, more so than we are like legal experts who can talk to us about map making. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, I agree, because once you can't talk about biased and unbiased, and the reality is these are still public meetings, and we can invite people to this particular group, but if others say, hey, we want to weigh in on this, they can do it two ways. When I don't foresee us, at least personally, I wouldn't want to prevent somebody from having input through, during the expert session, by us somehow determining they're not experts, because I think that's problematic. Secondly, the reality is when we, the next meeting that we have for public input, anybody that wants to have input is going to be able to have input. And if they say they're, they represent the, an NAACP group or the RWCA, I don't think we can tell them they can't comment again. At least I would be uncomfortable with that. So I think seems to me the idea was to try to get the people that, or the groups that, typically are involved in voter issues and voter education to hear their concerns or input, but not necessarily limit it to true experts in the field of redistricting and election.
I think you're right. I mean, and I think that term is used kind of loosely, and I don't think the intent is for them to come in and say, oh, well, you know, we're going to scramble this all up and start all over because we don't like this or this. I think the idea is for them, to people who have an interest in elections and voting and that type of thing, whether they're true experts or just groups with the special interest groups may even be a better term.
We're looking
to
at our
come
civic institutions.
Right. To just, you know, just kind of check that box and make sure that, you know, if they think, you know, there's pros, it's the same thing, pros and cons. What do you like about this? What do you don't like about that? That's more of the, I think, contemplated plan, because we're pretty far along, and, you know, to start making, I don't think the idea is to make a lot of changes at this point.
So,
But anyway, my 2 cents.
with that in mind, Robin, then I would say that maybe expert isn't the right term, and that civic organization feedback, or however, something that's less, or let's say more inclusive, and not in some way appearing to sort of block people from participation.
Yeah, I think the idea is let anybody who wants to make a, make comments can make comments regardless of what box that you put them in, you know, I mean.
Well, we
if you
may have
bring
some.
them at the expert meeting, bring them into the other, but.
Well, we may have some that we want to invite in, but the door is open for anybody else.
Agreed.
I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
Who wants to share their thoughts? Oh, and Taisha just shared in the chat with us where we can attend the listening sessions that she is hosting on the 6th and the 8th. Thank you. So that is also a good way for us to just keep gathering more information. Returning to Ashton's comment about the January dates, do we want to go ahead and put those on the calendar and then confirm them maybe at the December 16th date?
I'd lean towards trying to get that settled now, and
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we can just start with that, those Thursdays, January 6th and 20th, potentially. So the 6th would be where we would kind of under the proposal discuss, right, and start synthesizing all of those pros and cons lists, kind of create the universe of information that's going to be distilled into the report. And then the 20th would be reviewing and finalizing the report.
I can't do the 20th if that matters. If anybody else likes that the best, then Brendan or Janie, I guess, could come, but I'm not available that day.
The dates work for me. I don't, wherever that's work.
Work for me too.
I guess one thing to think about, thinking about the 6th, is are those kind of 3 weeks that include Christmas and the New Year and all the other holidays that kind of show up there? Is that enough time to collect public feedback? Are we comfortable with that? And then on the counter side of it, if we wait till the 27th to have our kind of last meeting, is that too tight around our council deadline?
Yeah.
That's kind of a staff question, I think, because they're going to be synthesizing and putting something together, and then obviously then we're going to have to look it over.
It will obviously very much depend on how much revision goes into the report. I think that we can wrapping up earlier is better, because in terms of the mechanics of when, like if you meet on the 27th, was it the 27th? We're essentially having to get that into their agenda that day, or they don't get it in advance because the agenda gets published the next day. And so that would be very tight, especially if in that final deliberation you ask for any revisions.
Well, what if we did the 13th and the 20th?
I think that's fine, because I think that would give us a week to produce a draft based on the direction you give us on the 13th, which I believe we can do, because remember, this is not going to be some 50-page report. It's going to be, here's the alternatives and here's the...
I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by
if you want to tweak anything about it, then it gives us plenty of time to turn it around and get it into the council agenda and publish, so that they have, I think it would be good for them to have it in advance and for the public to see it with the agenda instead of it just being presented to them at the meeting.
And that gives us a little bit of flexibility if there's, in terms of public input, something comes up, that we might theoretically need to do something before the 13th.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like as with public comment and just y'all looking at it, it seems like you could start working on them all along the way as far as your personal pros and cons go.
Mm-hmm.
Be the last day for the public to provide you input via your email address, your study group at raleighnc.gov. I just need a date to share with staff so we can turn it off.
Okay.
Would that also be the 13th of December?
Yeah, if the 13th is the day we're meeting, I think that's when we would cut off that input.
Any feel?
Does it make sense to make that the 12th, actually, so that we have that content and time for the meeting?
Yeah, cut it off on the 12th, maybe?
January 12th, right?
January 12th, yes. All right. So is everybody on board with January 13th and 20th to finalize all this, to finalize the report? I see nods. I think we're good. Okay.
Yeah, I think that works.
May I ask what the format will be for the meeting, our next meeting with the group feedback? Are we having Ken do his presentation and then get feedback from them, or are they expected to have this information and plow through with their feedback and we treat it sort of like a public hearing?
I might suggest an abbreviated version of the presentation that can be done in around 5 to 10 minutes that just gives some brief background and goes over the 5% rule, the charge, the 6 criteria, and I'll work with Ray on how we present the maps to make sure that we're presenting them in a way that to the lay public will be easy to understand. But we'll try to tighten it up. I do think it would be good for those who are maybe interested and have signed up to speak to at least have some refresher. Although I would anticipate that most people who go, since these are online meetings, you're going to have to sign up in advance if you want to be a speaker. And they're probably, if they decided that they wanted to speak, they probably looked at the maps before making that decision. But it might not be bad to do a brief refresher at the beginning. So we'll just try to keep it short and high level.
Yeah. And also hopefully that would foreclose potential feedback that is not something that is actionable but within by the study group.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, Robin, in terms of, there's no way to know how many people are going to want to have input. Are we allowed to put some time limits on
Yeah,
folks?
absolutely. I have a 3:30 I cannot be late for, so I'm going to have to jump off of this. But yes, you can have time limits for that. And I think that's a really good idea to do. And you may want to see how many people you got before you even decide that. I mean, generally that's, other than zoning cases, which are always 8 minutes, with public comment, that's generally what the mayor does or the city council has done, just to make sure that it's it's manageable.
Well,
And then
I think,
Go ahead.
no, you go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say, in terms of the, folks having to sign up, I think it's really important that that information get out there, because it feels like we're quite a distance from December 2nd, but with Thanksgiving next week, I think that probably means folks are going to have to sign up by next Wednesday, right? To speak on December 2nd or thereabouts. What would,
Well, I want to give them as much time as possible. I mean, personally, and I'm just sorry, this is for the group, but I mean, why do we should be, how close to the meeting can we allow folks to sign up? Because, there's going to be criticism probably regardless of what we do and how we do it.
I'm going to let Janie jump on the screen. I've got to go.
Okay.
and just to clarify, I'm not, I would like folks to have as much time as possible as well. I was just want to make sure we tell folks, when that deadline is. And I have another meeting on the 2nd, and I know the deadline is Wednesday. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
These are also logistics questions that I can work with staff to clarify in the next couple of days so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page with an agenda heading into the 2nd. Because we just might not have the answers right now.
and that's fine. I mean, my issue would be how, maybe it's for the 2nd meeting, because then this one's going to be a little different, but how close to the actual date can we allow people to sign up?
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to decide on a time, and I'm not necessarily saying the time of the meeting, but for each speaker,
Yeah.
I think for something like this, in the public hearing realm, council gives each side 8 minutes and that's it, and they have to divide it up any way they want. I think this is important, and some once every 10 year. So we should be prepared to go, for as long as people want to speak, but we give each person a time limit. But I don't necessarily feel comfortable saying, hey, we're going to only allow public comment for 30 minutes if we have a lot of people signed up. So, but that's subject to the rest of the group and what you all think.
Yeah, I agree that we should err on the side of letting people share their thoughts. I mean, this is an information gathering exercise. And I think for our own calendaring purposes, we should probably all just check off that 2 to 3:30 block. And we'll see whether or not we actually think that's all going to get used based on public interest.
So I believe, so a couple of things. For a lot of our official meetings happen on Tuesday, and it's been sort of the practice to require signups by the Friday before the meeting. But it is possible for us to push the close of the sign up closer to the meeting date. The purpose of the signups is because the meeting's virtual. We have to know who wants to speak, and we have to directly, contact them and be able to contact them if for some reason their connection isn't working and they need to be patched in by phone. The moderator, has to have control. In order to do that, they have to have a master list of who wants to talk. The other thing I would say is that I don't believe you have to advertise the number of minutes you're going to give in advance. I think you can make that decision based on whether you have a many or a few signups. So obviously, if you have 50 people signed up to speak and you have an hour and a half to hear from them, if you want to hear from all of them, you're going to have to impose a time limit. If you got 5 people signed up to speak, then you can be more generous. So I think you can make that decision at the meeting. You'll have that list in advance of the meeting. We will make sure that we close it out in time that you have the list in advance so you can plan accordingly.
And I would, on these public meeting, I would probably, if to the extent people can, I would block out some extra time on the back end. Again, because it just looks bad if we all go, we've been here an hour and a half and we've got 5 more people that want to speak. I feel like, we ought to do as much as we can to allow as many people to talk within reason. Obviously, we're not going to sit here till midnight, I don't think, but I think just maybe blocking off a half hour more, just in case there are a good number of people that, we need to accommodate or try to.
Yeah, and we can also highlight that the fact that they can email us comments, right? If somebody has an entire treatise that they want to give us, it might actually be better that they email it to us, depending on the context. So there's not going to be a lack of ways, right, for their opinions and experience to be made known to us, both in person and through written communication.
One other question, Catherine and Ken, can we get the slideshow that you gave us today distributed so that we can review it for our own purposes?
Yes, absolutely. We will distribute it to you, and we'll probably post it to the website as well.
Was Ray able to find out how we can find the external link to the GIS map?
Yeah, so just real quick, the easiest way to find the information is to hop on the city's website, raleighNC.gov, search redistricting, and right now it's the second result called the page is called redistricting following the 2020 census. On that page is where we're posting everything, so that's where the PowerPoint presentation will go. The static image maps are already there with the tables as people scroll down, and with those static maps, there's a link to the viewer where they can head into.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll follow up with Ken and Janie about December 2nd and some of those logistics questions, make sure that we'll all be on the same page. I'll share in the agenda also what some of those rules might be. Does anybody else have any final issues that we need to work through before we adjourn?
Thank you for taking on this assignment, Catherine.
Yep. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.
It's being a real cool bunch of people to work with, though. So it's not that hard. All right, everybody. All right. See you on the 2nd.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.